PD, hit those lights for me if you don't mind. Thank you, sir. Good morning, y'all. Whew. Good to see you all. We are in week 4 of our sermon series. And man, I would love to stay in this sermon series, but we've got Easter coming up, so we want to start preaching some good gospel sermons the next few weeks to prepare our hearts and minds for that Easter celebration. And so we want to get to our 4th and final soil that we're talking about this morning. And so in order to set our minds up for this, I want to start out with a question that's easier to ask than it is to answer, at least to answer honestly. And that is, right now in your life, what's stopping your growth? Everyone just sit with that for a second. What's keeping you from the growth that you know God is calling you to have in your life? I've been reading a lot of John Maxwell, and one of the things that he likes to say, he says, you didn't come this far just to come this far. Have you guys heard that before? You didn't come this far just to come this far. And I love that because I look around at this church, and as I prepared this sermon, I was just praying over our congregation, just thinking about you guys. I was thinking about all of you that came from Riverside Classic. That's a good way to say that, right? We had Classic Riverside, and we got what this is, right? All of y'all that transitioned with us, man, we fought for this. We fought to build a church that would change the community around us, that would impact our city with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it was hard fought, and it was rough at times. And a lot of you, man, you went through it, and you felt the pulls and tugs in other directions. And for whatever reason, here you are this morning. And look, you didn't come this far just to come this far. So what's stopping you from growing the way that God is calling you to grow? I think about those of you that have been here for a while, right? I look over at Mr. Elmo and Miss Guyla. They've been a part of Riverside longer than I've been alive, and then some. And I think about, man, for some of you that, like, y'all have been here for a long time, the same is true for you. Like, you're still here. You're still living and breathing, which means you're not done bearing fruit. There's still some growth that God is calling you to, because God didn't bring you to this point just to bring you to this point. I think of some of you that, man, you're brand new here. Maybe you're new in the Word, or you're new in your faith, or you're just new to Riverside. The same thing's true for you. God isn't calling you just to show up. He's not calling you to arrive here. He's calling you to grow and to bear fruit. And some of you are like, give me a break, like it's a blessing that I'm here this morning. I know it's true. Like there are members in this church that, like, you woke up and praise God this morning just because you woke up sober, right? Like you've been through enough stormy seasons in your life that just being here and being healthy enough to even be here this morning is a blessing from God. And you've struggled through your own closet full of demons, and so you're like, man, isn't it enough that I'm here right now? And to that I say, look, God didn't bring you this far just to bring you this far. So what's stopping you from growing? If you've been going through it and you're just thankful to be here, I see you, and I respect you, and I love you, and I'm thankful that you are here this morning. But what's stopping you from growing? What's stopping you from achieving whatever it is God's put on your heart to do, or to cull away from your life, whatever it is that you know you've been walking back into that isn't good for you? What is keeping you from growing into the person that God is calling you to be? Throughout this sermon series, we've talked about the seed that is the implanted word of God. The seed is spread on the hard path, and the birds come down and snatch it. And as we studied that, we realized that seed where people hear it, but they don't understand the word. And so we all kind of owned up to the fact that maybe Christians need to be a little bit less weird and a little bit less political and a little bit less ugly on social media. And maybe we need to give the gospel to people that are desperately wanting to hear something that is hopeful and loving in a way that they actually understand it. And then we talked about the seed that fell into the rocky soil. And the problem with the rocky soil is that it can't build roots, right? And so last week we talked about the need to grow deep roots. And we talked about some of those spiritual disciplines, right? How God calls us to be in the church and a part of a corporate church and to have Christians around you and to get into your word and to get your prayer life in order, because he's not calling you to a religion. He's calling you to a relationship. He wants you to have deep roots in the presence and spirit of Jesus Christ. Otherwise, you will not grow. And we spent a week talking about the good soil. And we reminded ourselves, if you've ever gardened, you know good soil doesn't stay good soil without work. So this week we're going to close by talking about the thorny soil. We're going to take a look in the text and we'll preach a little bit. Jumping into Luke chapter 8 this time. You can read this out of Luke chapter 8. You can read this out of Matthew chapter 13. It's also in the Gospel of Mark. So you've got a few different versions of this, different apostles reminding us of the words of Jesus. Luke chapter 8, he says, "A farmer went out to sow his seed. And as he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and it was trampled on. The birds ate it up. Some fell on the rocky ground, and when it came up, the plants withered because they had no moisture. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up with it and choked the plants." What we're talking about this morning is the seed that was thrown among the soil, but that soil has thorns and weeds and thistles and briars. We remember way back in Genesis chapter 1, when man sinned, when man fell out of relationship with God, the consequences of that sin, he said, look, the land is going to yield up its fruit, but you're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to suffer through it. Now it gives up its fruit through the thorns and the briars, and you're going to have to do some gardening if you want to experience the fruit of the land. And so then you have the seed that falls on good soil, and it produces a fruit, and it yields a crop 100 times more than what was sown. We see it as well in Matthew chapter 13. We're just going to set up our text this morning. Matthew chapter 13, the seed falling among the thorns refers to somebody who hears the word. Did I miss a verse? Can we get the explanation in Luke 8? My bad. In Luke chapter 8, so again, if you're reading this, if you're following along in your Bible, Jesus says the parable. And then the disciples are confused. They're like, that's weird. Can you just tell it to us straight? And then Jesus goes back and he explains the parable. And so in the explanation in Luke 8, he says this: the seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries, the riches and pleasures of life, and they do not mature. Literally, that word for mature is kind of an interesting word. They do not yield fruit to maturity. So it's a good, strong plant. And we haven't gotten this far yet, right? Like every week before this, we saw the seed that didn't even turn into a plant because there was no understanding. We saw the seed that started to grow, but it had no root system. So when the sun came out, it scorched it and it withered away. And now we're talking about the seed that, man, it grows and it looks good. And it's probably a beautiful plant. The problem is it doesn't ever bear any fruit. Look around the churches today, man. Tell me if you don't see that. You see a lot of people packing themselves in the churches all over our country, this sort of Western Christianity, this sort of easy Christianity that sells you this prosperity gospel and it's overly ripe, cheap grace that you see everywhere. And so everywhere there are churches filled with people that look like Christians and talk like Christians and act like Christians and have all the religious convictions of Christians and yet bear no fruit the way Christians bear fruit. At some point we have to ask the question. The Bible tells us a good tree doesn't bear bad fruit and a bad tree doesn't bear good fruit, but each tree is recognized by the fruit it bears. And so if you are a Christian that doesn't bear fruit, are you a Christian? Is that harsh? Is that offensive to say? I mean, am I allowed to say that? Are you really a Christian if you're the nice, big, healthy plant that never gets around to bearing fruit? One of the hardest sermons I had to preach, or I had the privilege of preaching at Riverside, was a foreshadowing of the seasons that we were entering into. I think even as I preached it, I knew what was coming. I just didn't expect it was going to last so long. When we preached through the Gospel of John, and John says that it's Jesus saying that he goes, I'm the vine and you are the branches. And he goes, look, if you are a branch that bears fruit, I'm going to prune you so that you can bear more fruit. But if you're one of the branches that doesn't bear fruit, he says, not only will I prune you, I will cut you away and throw you into the fire, and you will be burned. That's what you're good for, right? And it's this harsh reality of the Christian life that you can be here and utterly be wasting your time. Let me say this, we're not one of those churches that's all about the numbers. That's a thing that a lot of preachers say on stage, and then they meticulously worry over the numbers, right? So I hope this isn't oversharing, Joe, but I was having a conversation with one of our elders a few days ago, and we were talking about some of the numbers, the finances and the church and where we were at as a church and some of the changes that we've seen and some of the beautiful growth that we've seen, some of the people that are coming into faith and they're taking steps and are serving in new ways or putting their faith in Jesus for the first time. And I heard from one of my elders, and man, this is the kind of stuff that just gets me excited. But I said something about the count Sunday, and he goes, I don't worry about the numbers anymore. He goes, I'm not worried about that. And I just the way he said it, man. Because look, it's easy for me to say, but man, Joe's a business guy, right? Like numbers matter to him, right? And so when one of our elders is so on mission and so shepherding this flock that he looks at it and he goes, it's not the numbers that matter. That gets me fired up because there's plenty of churches that are packed with people. And you look at the church and you go, man, where's the fruit? Like if you were to close today, would the community miss you? Would the city be any worse off without you if you were to shut your doors today? Are you actually fruit-bearing Christians, or is all the distraction, the pleasures of life and the promise of wealth, the deceitfulness of riches, has all of that come in and choked out every opportunity that God has put in your life to make a difference in your life, in your family's life, in your community, in your job, at your school, or otherwise as a Christian in this life? In other words, are you just spinning your wheels? Are you just wasting your time? Is this a waste? Like what I'm doing right now? Because preaching to Christians that have no intentions of bearing fruit, it just kind of seems like a waste, right? Like what's the point of an apple tree, or down here, what's the point of a satsuma tree if it never grows any satsumas, right? Like there's prettier trees to plant, right? If all it is yard decoration, we could go a different route, right? Fruit trees are made to bear fruit. They have a purpose, and you as a Christian, you are made to live your purpose. And look, your purpose is different than my purpose. Some of you, maybe, man, you're doing exactly what God told you to do, and God's just going, now let's get rid of the weeds. Let's cull back the thorns so that you can bear more fruit. And there's some of you that, man, you know, you're so worried and so distracted and so busy over nothing. You're filling your life with so much stuff that doesn't ever amount to anything that you know you are not bearing the fruit that God is calling you to bear. And that makes all of this, that makes your Christian experience utterly waste of my time and yours if you are here to be the nice, good Christian plant but never actually bear any fruit in the process. We see it in Matthew chapter 13. The seed falling among the thorns refers to somebody who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. Matthew chapter 6, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus kind of explains what he means by the deceitfulness of wealth here. He says, look, you can't serve two masters, right? Either your finances will serve your faith, or your finances will distract you from your faith, right? You're either obeying God with your money, or you're trying to obey your money and worship money, and you are trying to use God like an ATM machine to serve your personal means, right? But what he says you cannot have two masters. You cannot serve God and wealth. You can't do it. They are in opposition to one another, because what happens is you will get overtaxed, you will get over leveraged, you will get where you have no more margin anywhere else in your life, and you know you're on autopilot, you're sleepwalking through your life, you're going through day after day after day, too busy to ever get around to doing anything that makes a difference. Anybody else too busy in their lives right now? There's a lot going on. A lot of things kind of crowding out the fruit that God is calling you to do. It's easy to start dealing with the urgent and never get around to dealing with the important. We start dealing with all the things that pops up in our life, all the things that make us busy and stressed and anxious. And because of all the little fires that we have to put out, because of all the things we have to deal with, because of all the things you've got going on in your overly busy, overscheduled lives, you never get around to doing what actually matters. And so last week I preached a sermon where I'm going, man, are you not deepening your roots? Are you getting into the Word and are you praying? And some of you are sitting there going, where am I going to get the time? Who can do all of that? Don't you know I've got so much other stuff crowding out my life right now? When am I ever going to get around to being like that kind of Christian? There is right now in this life, in this world, in the culture that we live in, there is a war, a constant war for your attention. And it's pulling you in every different direction. And it's causing the worries of life and the promises of getting your bag and making your money and cashing that check and getting to the next level and finally having whatever it is that you think are going to make your parents proud or going to make your neighbors jealous or whatever it is that you're going after. And so you just work day after day to become this type of person that you think the world wants you to be. And so many of us, it's at the expense of our souls. He tells us, he goes, man, you can be the plant. You've heard the word. You obeyed the gospel, the plant grew, and it's big and it's nice, but it never produces any fruit. Which means you can hover around in Christian culture for years. You can be a part of a healthy church for years and not ever be healthy yourself. The question this morning is not, are you a Christian? It's, are you bearing fruit? And if you're not bearing fruit, let's be honest, what's stopping your growth this morning? Some observations about the text as we look at it. If you've ever gardened, you know this to be true. You've got to work to grow fruit, but you don't have to do any work to grow weeds, right? You guys ever notice that? Like the weeds go there, man. The thorns, they just belong in the soil. And I don't mean to step on I don't know everybody's doctrine of original sin and kind of how you feel about that, but there's some deep theology behind what I'm telling you right now, okay? There's some really tough things we have to come to terms with. We are sinners, and our body, our fleshly cravings desire sin, despite ourselves. It's the reason why you can claim to believe one thing and claim to put your hope in one thing on Sunday morning and then go out on Saturday night and live a completely different way, right? Because while we are trying to cultivate fruit in our life, man, those thorns, they just act like they belong. Those thorns are going, this sin, this besetting sin on your life, this sin's been here way longer than that Holy Spirit's been inside of you. Right? You obeyed the gospel a couple years ago, but you've been struggling with that sin your whole life, right? Like there's some of us, the way we're wired, there's certain things that we deal with that we've been struggling with our entire lives. And so when you start trying to tend your garden, it's the easiest thing in the world for the thorns to pop back up. It's no trouble at all for the weeds to come back up through the soil and to begin crowding out every good thing that God is seeking to see you do in your life. And so look, I feel a little bit unqualified to say what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it because I look around the room and we have in our church, we have PE teachers and trainers and we have accountants and money people. That's what money people. You can tell how good I am with my finances, right? We have people that are therapists and counselors and things like that. And so I tend to just only stay on the spiritual when I'm preaching because I think that's why most people come to church. They want to focus on the spiritual. But the truth is, when I tell you that the Bible is a step-by-step instruction manual to your life, it's not just the spiritual part of your life, because the spiritual part of your life transcends into all the rest of your life. And so it might be you've got some deep carnal sins, some lusts of the flesh that are crowding out your soil, but it could be other stuff too. How are you doing spiritually, emotionally, physically? How are you doing financially? How are you doing relationally, right? There's a lot of ways that we can let the distractions of the world crowd out the good fruit. There's a lot of ways we can let ourselves go. We can become healthy in one area and begin getting unhealthy in another area, and the unhealthy part of our life will begin to crowd out the fruit in the rest of our life. And so look, when the Bible speaks so much about your checkbook. Like there's so many Bible verses about getting your finances in order. There's so many Bible verses about your health and taking care of yourself and your well-being. And there's so many Bible verses about the way you treat one another and the relationships you cultivate with one another. Because the truth is, man, the thorns come from everywhere. The thorns that are crowding out the fruit in your life can come from all over the place. So let me ask you again, what's crowding out the growth in your life? What's stopping you from growing right now? What's getting in the way? Because you didn't come this far just to come this far. God didn't call you to arrive here this morning. He says, I want you to grow. And I want you to keep growing until you bear fruit. And I want you to keep bearing fruit until the people around you begin to bear fruit in their lives. And then I want them to bear fruit until they bear fruit in other people's lives. And that's the way the gospel and the church and the message of hope and love and redemption spreads to a dark and hurting world. The problem is not that God's not working. It's not that he's not sending the rain. It's that, man, we just let ourselves go. We just let other things, we just let the thorns crowd out the good fruit in our life. So I began this sermon series by saying that spring is a season for sowing. For a lot of you, spring is good for another season, right? How many of you do spring cleaning? Anybody? Some of you are like, I need to, right? Spring cleaning is like a necessary, and I don't care if you do it in the spring, like you know what I'm talking about. Whenever you do it, there comes that time in your home where you're like looking around and you're like we're not even inviting people over because our house is messy, right? Like we just have stuff that's just getting in the way, right? Maybe I'm just telling on myself. I hope I'm praying to God that you guys are with me on this, right? Like you ever you go to sit at the table for dinner, but you got too much stuff on the table, so you just go eat somewhere else? Anybody? I hope that's not just us. I hope I'm not just embarrassing my wife and just telling on us right now. But man, we do that. Like we will let just clutter begin to change the way we live our lives. And some of us, we do the same things with our spiritual lives. It's like it's time for spring cleaning. We look around and we go, man, like I was good for a while. I was healthy for a while. I was growing. I was on fire spiritually. And then the clutter happened. And then stuff just started crowding out the fruit in my life. And then we look at this and he's like, look, clear the thorns, man. Like clear out what's getting in the way. It's time for some of us to do some spring cleaning. It's time for some of us to kind of take inventory and to look around and go, man, what's really stopping my growth? What's really stopping my church from being the church that God's calling us to be? What's really stopping my family from being the family that God has called us to be? What's stopping me from producing the fruit that God has prepared beforehand for me to do? Is it just clutter in my life? Is there just too much stuff going on, stuff that I don't need? You ever done the spring cleaning and then it turns into like a yard sale, right? Because you realize you're just like, man, I've just got stuff that no longer belongs here. It no longer benefits us. It no longer serves its purpose. How many of y'all do this thing? You do the spring cleaning and you find that stuff that you're like, yeah, I need to get rid of this. Like, I don't need this anymore. And you carry it out to the trash can and you look at it and you go, I really like it though. Like maybe I'll, how many of you have ever done that? Like you just bring it back in, right? So my wife has a table, a dining table that's currently set up in our kitchen dining room. We don't really have a dining room. It's like kitchen and living room, but it's set up in our home right now. And man, I hate this table. I just got to say, I've always hated this table. I don't think it's functional. I don't think it's made well. I don't think it's pretty, but it's sentimental, right? It was a family member's of hers, and so she is never ever going to get rid of it. And I've tried so many times, but for years, I had a lot of stuff from like my rock band days that Janae has just slowly over the years just disposed of. Like she just waits until I forget about it and then finds a convenient time to throw it away. I used to have this like glowing like LED clock that never hung up on any wall because it was awful, right? But I loved it for no good reason. And I would just carry it from every time we moved, I would carry this clock. And it would usually just stay in the box, right? Do we still have that clock? Yeah, you finally threw it away, right? You're like, we are getting rid of this clock. And I'm like, no, I like it. It's my clock. And she's like, you don't even hang it up. Like it hasn't even been put up anywhere for years now. We're throwing it away, right? Look, that's the way it is with spring cleaning, right? Like sometimes it's the stuff that crowds out our life and we just go, oh, but I like it. I don't want to get rid of it. And there's a part of us, like God's like tugging on you. The Holy Spirit's working on you. He's going, man, this doesn't work in your life right now. Like there's some people in your life that God's going, delete the contact. Block them. Just get rid of them. You don't need them in your life. They're not good for you. They're not helping you spiritually. They're not trying to get you to heaven, right? Like some of y'all, you have people in your life that are way more concerned with, I'm not going to say that. New year, new me, right? You have some people in your life that are not concerned with getting you to heaven, right? I'll just say it that way. We'll just keep it G-rated. I won't say the crazy stuff that comes into my mind. And look, you've got habits, man. You've got relationships. You've got just some nonsense, man. How many of y'all you just have noise in your life? You know it because some of y'all, you went to bed last night doing this on your phone, just scrolling. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever, and you woke up this morning, the first thing you did was check your messages, just scrolling, and none of it made you a better Christian, none of it helped you, none of it made you more informed, right? Like none of it really did anything beneficial for you. It's just this weird, senseless addiction that you allow to take up hours of your life, and it is crowding out your spiritual fruit. I can go on and on. Like I could do this for an hour. I can just name stuff that I probably deal with, but I think you definitely deal with, right? When really it's me, right? Like we can do this. Like we can point out all the little things that we know are crowding out our lives, but the problem is the Bible promises this. The Bible says there's always going to be this tension between what God is calling you to do, the fruit that he's calling you to produce, and the things that are crowding it out, that are fighting that war for your attention, that's taking you away from the person that you know that God is calling you to become. Paul says it this way in Romans chapter 7. For I do not do the good I want to do. You can sum up Christianity in one sentence just like that, right? The world looks at the church and is like, I think Christians are a bunch of hypocrites. And Paul's like, we are the hypocrites. Like I do not defend that. When people are like, I think your church is a full of bunch of hypocrites, I'm like, then you would fit right in, right? Like that's all I ever say, right? I'm done denying that Christians are bad Christians. There's no good Christians. There was only ever one good Christian, and we put him on a cross, right? Like there are no good Christians. We're all the hypocrites because all of us do not do the good that we wish we did. He says, for I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Anyone? I don't do the good I want to do, but the evil I don't want to do, I keep doing it. Right? Like I keep taking those things that I know I need to get out of my house. I keep taking those things that I know God is calling me to get rid of when it's time for spring cleaning, and I carry them out to the dumpster, and I look around and I go, she'll let me keep it one more year, right? And then we carry it back in and we throw it back, and we just let it clutter up our lives. We let it crowd out the good of our lives. We all do it. Good that I don't want to do, I do. No, sorry. For I don't do the good I want to do, and the evil that I don't want to do, I do. I just keep doing it. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it's no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being, I delight in God's law. But I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work in me. See, this relationship between the fruit and the thorns, Paul calls it a war. He says it's waging war. I've got this sinful self that keeps trying to do the things that I don't want to do anymore. And I've got this good in me, this God in me that's calling me to produce fruit and calling me to do good and calling me to love deeper and to serve more and to build people up rather than tear people down. I have the Spirit of God that's calling me away from a life of envy and away from a life of lustful pursuits and away from a life of deceitful riches. I have the Spirit of God in me that's calling me to become the person that I never thought I could be and never will be on my own, but it is at war with the thorns that are crowding out all of the good that I wish I was doing but usually don't ever get around to doing. There's the good I want to do that I don't do. And there's the evil in me that I don't want to do that I keep doing. He says it's waging war. I don't think I'll ever be able to outpreach the classic Piper sermon in the 80s. He preached it like the year I was born or something, called Make War. And I just remember it was like it was probably the first Piper sermon I ever heard. And I remember hearing it, and he got to this point. He was preaching through Romans 7, and he gets to this point. He goes, so what do you do about this? And I just remember he just pounds the pulpit, and he goes, make war. You guys ever heard that before? And it's never left my mind, because you read that, you're going, well, what am I supposed to do about this? With this sinful nature waging war against the Spirit of God that dwells in me. And the conclusion is, man, fight back. Wage war. Tend your garden. I don't care if you have to go into your garden with some gloves and some gardening shears, or if you got to go in with a chainsaw, but do what you have to do to clear away the thorns. Like some of y'all need to take a fast from your TVs, your technology. Some of you need to turn off the social media apps. Some of you need to delete some contacts on your phone. Like start making war against the sinful part of you that keeps making you do all the foolish things that you know that you don't want to do. Because, man, it's always going to be there. The thorns belong in the soil. That's the sinful nature. That is our sinful flesh that we will never get away from until we are His in heaven. And He goes, I'm getting rid of that flesh. I'm going to give you a new body. Until that day comes, there's always going to be the war. There's always going to be the need to tend the garden. There's always going to be a need for us to gather together, to look each other in the eyes, and to say, what's getting in the way of your growth? Because God did not call you this far to stop here. He's got a purpose for you. He's got a life for you. He's got a person for you to become. He's calling you to leave hell behind and embrace kingdom living, to accept the kingdom blessings of God. He's calling you to a life of fruitfulness, and it is a life where in the presence of God there is fullness of joy. He says this is the inexpressible joy. This is the peace that surpasses understanding. The Christian life is the good life. And if you're looking around going, my life doesn't look like that, what thorns are crowding out the fruit of your life? The goal is good soil to produce good fruit. The challenge is, man, the thorns come back. They come back season after season. And every season we tend the garden. Every season we do spring cleaning. I've been thinking about Easter coming up, and I know for a lot of churches, Easter is like the biggest Sunday of the year, and it's like this huge opportunity for Christians all over the world to come together and to worship God and to just to remind ourselves that God conquered death, He conquered sin, and He calls us to newness of life. And it's supposed to be this big culmination Sunday where just Christians everywhere come together and worship. And as I was thinking about this, I was getting ready to kind of tie up this sermon series and start thinking that direction. I kept asking myself, man, is our church even ready to worship on Easter? Like, are we so distracted? Do we come here on Sunday morning and like we spend the first two songs just trying to get our minds right before we even start engaging in worshiping Him? Are we going to just preach through another empty sermons for a couple of weeks and we get to Easter Sunday and it's just going to be hollow? Is that our church? Is that what's happening? Because there's just so much stuff fighting for your attention. There's so many distractions. There's so many things just crowding out the fruit in our lives. I want to give you a challenge. I'll close with this. What's God asking you to turn off, cut away, shut down, say no to, or walk away from? What is God asking you to prune in your life so that you can bear fruit? Here's my challenge for you. What happens in your life if on Saturday night you put your phone down, you turn the TV off, you stop watching the news, it's mindless, it's sensational, it's not actually trying to inform you. You stop scrolling through social media. I know it feels like you're getting some kind of satisfaction from that. You are synthesizing your own happiness, and it's only leading to dopamine resistance, to a numbness that you just carry with you throughout the rest of your week. So what happens if on Saturday night you just turn all of that off? You just fast? You just don't engage in any of that? What happens if you show up to Sunday morning, detox from all the distractions of your life with a heart that's ready to worship? Do you think God will move amongst this congregation? If we just start actively preparing ourselves to worship Him when we come together as a church, going, I don't need the distractions. I don't need that stuff in my life. For just a little while, I can turn off the noise and focus on what really matters in this life. Do you think you'll bear fruit? Do you think that the more you grow in Him, the more fruit you bear, the better your life gets? Man, what happens if we just all commit ourselves to that? I'll do it if you do it. Man, it's just Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. We just turn everything off. I'm not going to let that stuff distract me. You will miss nothing, right? You might miss a couple of text messages. Guess what? You can get them back Sunday afternoon. You can go home after church on Sunday. You can eat lunch. You can take your Sunday afternoon nap. And when you wake up on Sunday evening, if you do what I do, you wake up on Sunday evening, then you can hit all those people back and say, hey, sorry, I was trying to focus a little bit. It's okay to slow down, to take a rest, let the soil rest and get its nutrients back. It's okay to turn everything off and give yourself to Jesus. Jesus is calling you to Him. He's asking to allow His Spirit to bear fruit in your life. And He's challenging some of you, make war on everything that's getting in the way. I want to pray with you, and I just want to pray that prayer. God, we just come to you now. We just ask that you will help us to see you. God, we want to worship you. If our hearts aren't worshiping you this morning, it's because we've just let the worries of the world and the deceitfulness of wealth just crowd out what matters most. So God, just help us worship you. Help us pull back those thorns so that we can bear fruit. God, help us shut off the things that don't matter. Help us do the spring cleaning. And God, help us wage war on the sin that keeps cropping back up in our life, because we want a life of purpose. We want a life that makes a difference. We want a life that bears fruit in your kingdom, because that is an everlasting treasure. God, I just pray you will be our treasure. You will bring that Spirit upon this church. We just pray this in Jesus' name as we stand and as we sing.